Good evening and welcome back to ParaGhoul Paranormal Discoveries from the Dark. In case you're new here, this radio show and podcast dives deep into the shadows of Saskatchewan's past to learn what lies within. Sometimes we even go to other locations, whether across Western Canada or even all of Canada, to talk dark history, mysteries, and urban legends. And sometimes some monsters get in there too. I'm your host, K.D. Kulpa, and I'm a horror author and paranormal researcher here in Regina, Saskatchewan. I love digging into the past to bring life to the ghosts and monsters hiding in the dark. And I especially love going live with you every week to tell you what I've uncovered. Tonight, we're diving into another local mystery. We're traveling north of Regina, past Saskatoon, closer to the Prince Albert area. So put on some warm clothes, grab your flashlights as we dig into the mystery behind the St. Louis ghost lights. All right, as promised at the end of last week's episode, I thought it would be fun to dig into the mystery of the St. Louis ghost light tonight. A few of our guests on previous episodes have talked about this particular mystery as one of their favorites in Saskatchewan, one that helped them get more interested in the paranormal as they grew up. So I figured it was time to actually tell you, my listeners, about what this mystery is, just in case you've never heard the stories before. So first, let's talk a little bit about the history of this area of Saskatchewan. As you'll find, it is not a boring area for the prairies. A lot has actually happened just within the last 200 years, which could explain why so many people they think they see ghosts and phantom lights or hear strange things from around the areas while out exploring the back roads of Saskatchewan. And they don't all have to do with ghost trains. So St. Louis itself is a small village south of Prince Albert that is said to still have a population around 400 people. At least that's what the consensus says back in 2016. Although it wasn't incorporated as a village until May 19th, 1959, the claims say that a settlement had been there long before that date. According to the Village of St. Louis website, the original settlers arrived to the area back in the early 1880s, around the same time frame that the Canadian Pacific Railway was being constructed along southern Saskatchewan to cross from Ontario into British Columbia. So this isn't a surprising statistic, as many settlers were moving into Saskatchewan at that time, as the Canadian government, or at least Ontario government, was pushing settlers and those immigrating from other countries to move out west for land and opportunity for their families. So beyond the St. Louis Light, or ghost trains as some would claim, there are also many other historical sites that are full of interesting insight into Saskatchewan history close to this particular village. One of which is a large archaeological site of Indigenous artifacts that are said to be even older than the ones found at the Unexplained near Saskatoon. And so Saskatoon is southwest of this area, in case you're wondering. And some of the things that they found in the St. Louis archaeological site have included new species of wolf and buffalo that are said to be bigger than others they've seen before, and even decorative beads that they have dated to be 1,000 years older than they originally thought clothing decorations were used in the prairies. Another historical site that is kind of near St. Louis but to the southwest is the Batoche National Historic Site, and there's also the Battle of Turon's Coulee and Fish Creek National Historic Site. Like I said, a lot of history in this area. And in case you are not from Saskatchewan and listening in, just to quickly explain to you why these two locations are important, both of these sites are particularly important to Saskatchewan's Indigenous history. So these areas are connected to the Northwest Resistance from 1885, which would have also influenced the early settlers in St. Louis area, of course, which is why I felt it was important to mention it today. Now, this area is close to Duck Lake, which I found kind of cool and interesting, as I know one branch of my family actually lived in a stone house in the Duck Lake area around the time that they were settling in Saskatchewan. And Duck Lake and area is thought to be very haunted as well. Now, it is, like I said, it is rich in history relating to the Métis resistance, as one of their battles happened on, around these areas when they were fighting against the Northwest Field Force of the Dominion of Canada. This victory in 1885 was important as the Métis were fighting to protect their land rights and preserve their way of life. As, we talked about in previous episodes, the Canadian Pacific Railway, being built into southern Saskatchewan, even though it was not known as Saskatchewan yet, back in 1882 was when Ontario was promising this land and opportunities to settlers. So a lot of people were coming in and taking over the land, which of course the government at that time was not considering the needs and voices of the Indigenous already living in the area, which we already know very well today. So that is why this victory was so important to Saskatchewan history. The Northwest Resistance in 1885 was led by Louis Riel and Gabriel Dumont. Now, back to St. Louis specifically, it's located on the banks of the North Saskatchewan River that runs between St. Louis and Prince Albert. At first, the only way to cross the river was by ferry, which is said to have started running as early as 1876, so the ferry was there for quite a long time. But by 1914, a railway was being built through the community, connecting Watrous to Prince Albert. So before then, it was hard for the train to get from Watrous to Prince Albert because of the North Saskatchewan River. Now, this required the construction of a railway bridge, of course, and that is now known as the St. Louis Bridge. Now, at first, this bridge was only used for train traffic, so they didn't have any other way to cross the river other than the ferry. But given the rise of cars in Saskatchewan around this time, by 1928, wings were added to the bridge to allow for vehicles to also cross. And of course, this is when the ferry kind of closed down, because now you had not only trains going across the northern Saskatchewan River, you also now had vehicles able to go across. So no one was really using the ferries anymore. Okay, now let's get into the actual mystery that locals and visitors both claim occur on a regular basis in this area, so in St. Louis area specifically. This mystery is quite widespread, as it has appeared in Unsolved Mysteries, if you remember that old television show with the guy from the old Star Trek, yes, as well as many books, newspaper articles, blogs, and YouTube videos. It's interesting just how many things pop up when you actually search for this particular paranormal phenomenon. So yes, it's widely known that these lights exist and they come a lot. So it has a lot of people wondering, what could these lights be? The actual site for the paranormal experience is not directly in St. Louis itself. Instead, it is a few kilometers north of the village within the municipality of Prince Albert, actually. So, in fact, it's now even, I guess, on private property. I don't know if you heard my previous episodes where I was talking to a couple guests about their experiences with St. Louis, and we talked about how it is harder nowadays to actually go and see the site because, the railway was removed and the property was, given or sold away. So I've heard stories that you can't legally go onto the area nowadays just like whenever you want. You have to have permission from the site owner. And this is also likely why the St. Louis website that I've mentioned doesn't even talk about the ghost light as a potential attraction to visitors, because they have no way of allowing people to go out and experience it for themselves. Now, the stories themselves about this light are many, but they all kind of have a similar claim. Thankfully, I was able to find an article written by Sask Today online that went through some of the more common claims and stories about this particular paranormal mystery. And if you go back into some of our guest episodes, like I said, you can also hear more stories from other Saskatchewan residents that have been to the St. Louis area themselves to experience the light. From what I can tell, their stories are very similar to the ones that Sask Today had captured. So I kind of went with, what SAS Today captured instead of trying to go through the many, many others that are out there. Again, they all seem very similar. And the claims go that there are actually multiple different kind of lights. You can see one, or you can see the other, or maybe you'll even see both. There's the option that you might even see both of them. Sometimes the light is bright and huge and like a bright white light, as if it is on the train itself and coming directly towards you where you're standing or in a vehicle on the tracks. Others have said that they instead see a small red light swaying back and forth between what would have been probably the tree line on either side of the railway cut through, as if someone is walking along or standing on the front of a train while swinging a lantern. Now, some claims even say that when you see the ghost light or the ghost train, depending on which story you believe, even your vehicle will begin acting up. Some say it will not start again if you turn it off. Others say that your windshield wipers might turn on by themselves. And I even found one claim that, had listened to the previous claims of don't turn off your vehicle or it won't start. So they had said, well, we'll leave the vehicle running, only to have their vehicle start smoking when they saw the ghost light coming for them. So they took off thinking they'd try to get to Prince Albert to get it fixed before, fire started or anything happened. But the smoking suddenly stopped as soon as they left the area. And let me read to you the clip from the SAS Today article, like a small clip, which was written back in October 2013 by the author Katie. So Katie had obviously gone and talked to some people or, reached out to some people in St. Louis or people that had lived in St. Louis that know about this light. And this is kind of a little piece of one of the reports of what happened to somebody when they went to go looking for this light. So, again, I'll read this to you directly from the article. One man claims that in the summer of 1997, he and a group of friends decided to check out the phantom light, like so many people do, parking their car on the dirt path that was once a railway track. They decided to leave it running, since legend says the car won't start. If it's turned off, sorry. It took too long of a break there. He claims after being there for about half an hour, they finally saw the oncoming lights of a train and a smaller lantern light beside it. Scared to death, they hightailed it out of there, hearing the sound of a train whistle in the distance. So, again, here in this case, they had two lights. See, you could see one light, which is just the train light. You can see just the lantern, or you can see both the train light and the lantern. It seems to depend on the person. And I should clarify that this light, they say the light comes from the south. So it is as if the train is coming from Watrous, going towards Prince Albert, and about to pass through the St. Louis area towards the train, or towards the train bridge. Now, how do the locals and other paranormal enthusiasts that have experienced this light think this mystery started? What is the history of the area? What would cause these lights to suddenly start? Just like the experience, as I mentioned, it's different depending on the night, it seems. You might see one light, you might see two. The start of this mystery also has a few different claims. So it depends, I guess, on who you're talking to. The common theme is there is a common theme among this origin story. So as you might have guessed, because of what we've already been talking about, they do believe it is the light of a ghost train, or at least something that has to do with the railway tracks that the light is seen traveling on. I'm not so sure about this, but I'll get into that in a minute. One of the stories goes that a train conductor was in one of the front cars, and he leaned down to inspect something off the train with his lamp, only to be decapitated. So, completely lost his head. Other stories claim it was a worker, not necessarily a conductor or an engineer, walking along the tracks, holding up a lantern to signal the train to either switch tracks or stop, only to be run over by the train. Yet another story goes on to say that the worker was actually checking the tracks behind the train, so while the train was stopped, only to be run over by the train, like the train accidentally backed up over top of him. Another claim, again, is that a Canadian National Railway conductor was examining the tracks late at night and was accidentally decapitated by an oncoming train. This one seems to be the favorite tale from what I could tell. And the claim is that it happened sometime in the 1920s. The article I read that had claimed this said that before, good records were kept from the Canadian Pacific Railway. I have a hard time believing that one because there were newspapers at that time. But we'll get into what I think in a minute. But that's just something to remember. Like, we have the Saskatoon Star Phoenix in the late 1880s all the way through. We have the Regina Leader Post in the late 1880s all the way through. Like, we have access to these articles. But depending on the story, it could be a train conductor searching for his head at night. Or perhaps it's another train worker committed to continuing to inspect this non-existent train tracks forever. I don't know. Hard to really say, right? But what do the skeptics say? Of course, there have been many that have tried to explain this ghost light since it has been known to show up on almost a daily basis. Like, apparently this happens a lot. So students have been out to try and explain it. Universities have tried. I saw one article that had said even the Army has tried, although I couldn't find any sort of explanation about what the Army came up with, so I don't know if that one is true. Some claim that the mystery was solved by 2 grade 12 students from La Ronge, Saskatchewan, that actually won a gold in a science fair for their time investigating the area. So while standing along the old tracks, I guess they felt that they were able to duplicate this phenomenon by radioing a parent that was in a car to drive down a specific road, and the diffraction of the vehicle light supposedly can create a similar effect that would make you think you're seeing a ghost train light coming at you. That same SAS Today article that I mentioned earlier even had a local person mention that this light phenomenon dates back to before cars were in the area. So that's why locals are like, no, it's not headlights, because these lights have been here long before cars were even a thing in town. I'll read this portion from the article again directly, just because it's easier to read what they quoted. So it says, "My grandmother grew up in St. Louis and used to tell my dad and his siblings all about the ghost light," says a woman now in her 70s. We'll call her Suzanne. "She grew up before cars were invented, and even back then, the tale was still a popular one," Suzanne says. "Everyone in St. Louis knew about the light, and a lot had claimed to have seen it." So, I don't know. What do you think? In this case, if you're thinking, so this article was written in 2013, and this woman was in her 70s then, which would mean she probably was born sometime in the 1940s, maybe late 1930s. So, I don't know. Like I said, I guess, what do I think? Let's talk about what I think. I told you I'd give you kind of some information about what I found and what my personal opinion is. But I can't say for sure. I've never actually been out to St. Louis to check out this paranormal light for myself. It is definitely on my bucket list. So if anyone knows, anyone listening knows the owner of the land, please ask him if I can come do an on-site investigation myself for the radio show. Maybe even a book one day, but that's a little secret between me and you. And we'll see if that actually comes to be. When I was digging into the claims, like I said, about it being a train conductor in the 1920s, I searched Regina Leader Post archives. I searched Saskatoon Star Phoenix archives. I checked out, the big train accidents in Canada, because they have I think it's Wikipedia has a site that kind of lists a bunch of the major train accidents. And I know only one person being decapitated would not be considered a major train accident, but I feel like, it would get added to the list. Because some of those were back in the late 1800s, so 1920s, it should be there, right? And not to mention, by then Saskatchewan was a province, and we had major newspapers, reporting the news. So I feel like this would be a big news article in Saskatchewan back then. So the fact that I couldn't find anything about a man losing his head to a train makes me wonder if that story is actually accurate. It's not to say it's definitely not accurate, because maybe there's just a newspaper I can't find. Maybe they don't have it in the archives. Maybe it got lost. Maybe they never found a good copy of it. I don't know. I'm just saying I have a hard time believing it because I can't find any evidence. There is the local claim that the lights started before cars came to be. Like that woman said, her grandmother was talking about it to her dad. The train tracks, like we talked about, didn't even get into the St. Louis area until around 1914, 1915, when the railway bridge was constructed to connect Watrous to Prince Albert. If you remember, that's what we talked about. So, I don't know. It would have to be within that short time span, because by 1928, the two wings were added for vehicles to be there, meaning that there was only maybe 14 years or less between when there would have been a railway there to when vehicles would have started. So that's a very short timeline for there to be railway, but no vehicles for these lights to have started. So this makes me wonder if this phenomenon is actually something else entirely. And the fact that it happens on a train track site is just completely coincidental. Remember, this entire area has rich history. Well, Saskatchewan in general. We have such rich history here and a lot of it we don't even know about. So I would be curious to find out if, number one, are there any Indigenous stories or legends in the area that also talk about the lights? Because it was a well-known Indigenous area to have, had settlers in the area. So, or not settlers, sorry, Indigenous groups in the area, settlements in the area. So perhaps it's a light from something else. Or maybe it's a weird, the stars and the nearby river somehow make this weird effect on the, in front of you, because the light only ever comes out at night. So maybe it has something to do with that. Or maybe the claim that the lights were there before, vehicles is a lie, and maybe it is just the highway. Although, I don't know. What would then be causing the vehicles to act up? If those personal stories are true, where sometimes your vehicle won't start if you turn it off, or sometimes your windshield wipers will turn on. Why would those things happen? If you believe the personal stories. Again, personal stories are harder to believe, as we all know, because they can easily be faked, right? I don't know. Maybe this area isn't actually being haunted by ghosts at all. Maybe it's part of some UFO sighting. Although a UFO showing up every night for 100 years, that kind of seems like a stretch as well. Especially not well documented and, not... If the army was involved, you think they would have been more heavily involved if they thought it was UFOs. I have a hard time with this one. Again, I think I would have to see it for myself to really be able to give my personal opinion of what could actually be causing it. And I would like to turn off the vehicle to see if my vehicle doesn't turn back on. And I'd like to, kind of do some testing to see what actually happens. But what do you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts, or if you've had experiences of this particular, St. Louis light. Please let me know if you have. You can contact me on my website or social media platforms and let me know what you think. Or, like I said, if any of my listeners know who owns the land where the ghost light is said to still roam, please ask them to reach out to me and let me know if I can come investigate myself sometime this summer. I love collecting stories from Saskatchewan and trying to tie them to the history, as you can probably tell if you're listening to my radio show. So it would be great to add this to the collection. Like I said, between me and you, a collection I hope to maybe make into a book one day, or maybe multiple books. I don't know. I feel like there's a lot of stories. It would be hard to do them all in one book. But stay tuned for that. That would be a very far in the future thing. Anyway, thank you for joining me tonight. Did you know I also have a weekly newsletter that includes a link to the latest episode of ParaGhoul Paranormal? Subscribers also receive updates about upcoming events, behind-the-scenes information, and subscriber-only updates related to upcoming book releases, book signings, and more. If you're interested, you can head over to my website at kdkulpa.com to sign up. If you'd like to support the show and potential on-location adventures that we're starting to plan, maybe even a St. Louis Ghostlight adventure someday, you can find me on most social media platforms under KDKULPA. I also have a Patreon for those that want behind-the-scenes information, extra content like, videos. I've actually started uploading some videos of interviews and things, and a chance to join a live Q&A with me each month. Next week, we have a new guest coming on the show, so stay tuned for our upcoming episodes, where we'll uncover more secrets, unravel more mysteries, and delve deeper into the shadows. Until then, remember to keep your flashlight handy and digital recorders ready. This is Katie Kulpa, signing off. Until next time, my ghouls.